Story time about how I found out who my real mom was. So, long story short, I was given up for adoption because my real mom was into drugs. She signed me away as soon as I was born, and boom, I was in a new family. I was 15 at this time, so I was a sophomore in high school, and everything was pretty cool. My parents who adopted me always told me whenever I got to a certain age, I could go talk to my real mom if I wanted to. But at 15 years old, I wasn't allowed to. So one day we got this brand new teacher, and her name was Mrs. Green. And it was funny because my birth last name is Green. It's a common name, so no, it didn't stand out to me. I soon became the teacher's favorite. I was always smart in all of my classes, so this was no surprise to me. But what surprised me was when she started saying how beautiful and smart I was and how she knew I would go far in life. So sometime later, after having this new teacher, I started to tell my parents about her. As soon as I told them that her name was Mrs. Green, they instantly got chills. They tried not to make a big deal out of it, but like for part 2. This is part 2 about how I found out who my real mom was. So like I said in part 1, my parents were definitely alarmed because they already know everything about my real mom. But I guess they didn't want to alert me, so they let everything go by. So the next day at school, my teacher, Mrs. Green, pulls me aside and says, I have to talk to you. So she says, honey, you're so smart. Your parents must be so proud of you. So she then goes, do you mind if I speak with your parents, Mr. and Mrs. Green? Do you think we could sit down for a second? And I go, sure, but that's not their last names. She says, why not? And I go, oh, I'm adopted. She then says, do you know who your real parents are? I'm like, no, I only know a couple things about them. Why? She says, I have to tell you something. I'm your mother. In my head, I was like, what in God's name? How are you here? I'm like, how are you my real mom? How are you my teacher? Wait, what is going on here? So she says, I'd really like for all 4 of us to please sit down and talk something out. Like for part 3. Part 3 story time about how I found out who my real mom was. So like I said in part 2, my teacher was desperate to sit down with all 4 of us to talk something out. So I frantically say, yeah, sure, okay. So as I head home, and I mean I am speeding home, I tell my parents everything that happened. They then told me, oh yeah, she's been trying to get in contact with you. We just never told you. We were going to wait until you got older. Apparently, she's been watching my every move because she went sober and wanted to get back in contact with me. So as my parents are telling me that it's not safe to be around her and we should just move schools, I'm like, she is my birth mother and I'd like to see where she's coming from. So after talking it out for a while, they agreed that we could sit down and talk to her about it. So once we sat down and talked everything out, we decided that I would see her once a week. So one week I went over to her house and she said, hey, let's take a trip somewhere. I wasn't comfortable doing that, but she said we were just going to go to the store. Once I got in the car, we were driving for over an hour. She pulled over and tried to give me drugs. She was never sober. I sent my mom my location. I haven't seen her.
I have feelings for my coworker, but I'm engaged. I work in the medical field in a busy hospital. It feels like we've been short-staffed forever and it never seems to improve. This leads to us having to work double shifts almost daily. The money's great, but I'm rarely ever home. Sometimes we even sleep at the hospital and don't go home for days at a time. The people I work with are amazing and almost like family. At the moment, I see them more than my actual family. We all look out for each other and we're super close. But some of us might be a little too close. There's this guy I work with named Jason that I've developed feelings for. When you're with someone almost 16 hours a day, I guess it's bound to happen. The problem is that I'm already engaged to my fiance at home. It started out innocent at first. Casual, light flirting here and there, so subtle at times I didn't even think anything of it. One of those situations where you start out as friends, but things keep progressing. I knew my relationship was in jeopardy when Jason and I started texting when we weren't working. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop the conversations. If I'm being honest, at times I would be the one to text first and take the conversation away from the friend zone. I haven't talked to my fiance about it and I'm scared to death too. I still love him and feel terrible that I have feelings for someone else, and I haven't even gotten to the worst part of it all. Part 2, I have feelings for my coworker, but I'm engaged. I didn't tell my fiance about Jason because I felt like this was only happening because I was never home. I felt like hardly seeing him had to be the root cause of this mess. I talked to him about making more of an effort to see each other despite my crazy schedule. This worked for a little while, but I still had feelings I couldn't deny for Jason despite trying to suppress them. I even told Jason that we had to keep things strictly professional from now on, to which he agreed. However, this agreement didn't last long. Jason and I were assigned to work in the same area for the next month. One night when we were on break together, he started telling me how much he missed talking to me like we used to. One thing led to another, and we ended up making out in the break room. This was the first time it actually got physical between us, but sadly it wasn't the last. I'm ashamed to say it happened a few more times. At this point, I knew this couldn't keep going on, so I made the decision to break up with my fiance. I quickly found out that this was the wrong choice. Shortly after, I found out that Jason was sleeping with another girl at work. I was crushed and completely cut him off. I realized I made a mistake and tried to reach out to my fiance, but it was too late. I got distracted by what could have been and lost track of something great that I already had. I still regret it to this day.
Story time. I meet this guy on a dating app, but come to find out we go to the same school, have a bunch of mutual friends, and we have a ton of stuff in common. I talk to my friends and they all say he's a great guy. So we go on a first date. First date, remember this, it's important. We're having a great time. He parks the car so we can talk some more. Then it starts snowing. I'd said earlier that I'd never seen fresh snow before, so he runs out, opens my car door, starts blasting this love song over his car speakers, and we start slow dancing in the snow. He just keeps telling me to look up, and it's snowing, and we're dancing, and the music, we make eye contact, and we kiss. As he pulls away from the kiss, he says, "That's it. That's the second best moment of my entire life." And I'm like, "I'm sorry. The second?" And he says, "Well, yeah, the first hasn't happened yet. That's gonna be when we get married." This man proceeds to get down. If you haven't seen part 1, go watch it right now. First date story part 2. And this ain't no simple proposal either. This man is crying down on one knee. "Even though I've just met you moments ago, it feels as if I've known you my whole life. You are just proof that God exists because God sent you to me. I can't believe we have the privilege of being the world's greatest love story, and that we'll be able to tell our children about it one day. I can't wait for the rest of my life to begin right now with you." This whole time I'm thinking, this man drove me here. How am I getting home? Context clues. Okay, he said God about 3 times. He must be religious. So I respond, "This is really important. I think I'm gonna have to go home and pray about it." He drives me home and I never talk to him again. 2 weeks later, he sends me this. Yep, that's exactly what you think it is. A picture of us dancing in the snow.
Story time on how my own best friend set me up. Trigger warning, sexual assault. So when I was 13, 14 in the 8th grade, I met this girl, which we're going to call Aubrey. Throughout that year, we became really close friends, and we even went to each other's houses just about every day. And at that time, I was a virgin. I was very insecure, and I didn't know my worth. And definitely attracted to the wrong boys. And that's how me and Aubrey related. We bonded over trauma, which can be toxic. But anyways, one day we met these boys. At that time, I didn't know who these boys were, and Aubrey pretended not to know them either, but I had no idea. They had to be like 17, 18, but I actually really don't know because they probably lied about their age anyway. So we started hanging around these boys, which we're going to call Stick and George. And at that time, I really liked George. Throughout our weeks of hanging out, they asked if I ever smoked Mary Jane, and I said no because I've never smoked. Push come to shove, I get peer pressured into doing it. And I think it was laced. Come back for part 2. This is part 2 of how my own best friend set me up. Trigger warning, sexual assault. So like I said earlier, I got peer pressured into smoking Mary Jane, and I think it was laced. Throughout that time of being intoxicated, I didn't know what was really going on. And remember the guy I told you guys about, George? Well, he had his way with me and my friend. Aubrey knew about it but didn't say anything. I didn't realize the severity of the situation and definitely didn't agree to anything that happened. As time went on, I started to gain my memory back on what was actually going on and started to understand, and I decided to tell my family. But nothing happened. It was almost like the person who did it to me got a slap on the wrist for what he did.
If you're ever driving late at night, don't do what they did. 2 boys picked up a girl on the side of the road while they were on their way to a school dance. In the car, she kept saying that she was cold, so one of the boys gave her his jacket. But when the night ended and they were about to drop her off, the girl accidentally left with the jacket. So the boys said that they would just come back the next day to get it. But when they came back and knocked on her door, they discovered something that would make them question what is real and what isn't. An old woman opened the door and asked them who they were looking for. After talking to her for a while, it was revealed that the girl they found on the side of the road was her daughter. But the thing is, she had been dead for 12 years. She was killed in a car accident at the same street corner they first saw her. The old woman pointed to a cemetery down the road and said, "That's where we buried her." The boys didn't believe her at first. They'd spent the whole night with this girl, so they knew that she had to be real. But they went to the cemetery and saw the boy's jacket draped over a gravestone. And on the gravestone was the girl's name and the date of her death, exactly 12 years ago to the day.
Storytime about my roommate's crazy girlfriend. I'm a lesbian living with my good friend who's a guy. I own the apartment and rent out the room to him. A month ago, he met a girl online and they started dating. She's constantly at our place, and I'll be honest, I don't like her. She's always been incredibly rude and standoffish towards me. I eventually learned that it's because she thought I had a thing for my roomie, even after he told her I was gay, to which she replied that I don't look gay. A few weeks ago at a kickback at our place, I pulled her aside telling her that I really am gay and I hope that we could be friends. She seemed to take this very well and was overly friendly with me for the rest of the night. The next day, my roommate wanted to talk to me, saying that his girlfriend feels uncomfortable around me after I drunkenly hit on her. What? I wasn't drunk at all and I'm not attracted to her whatsoever. I explained to my roommate what really happened and he was skeptical but took my word for it, chalking it up to a miscommunication. A week later, we had another kickback and his girlfriend was there, of course. I was cordial but stayed away so another miscommunication wouldn't happen. Towards the end of the night, another friend said to me, "Dude, what's going on? She's telling everyone that you've been hitting on her all night." I was pissed off and went up to her in front of everyone saying, "What the hell's going on? Why are you spewing lies about me hitting on you to all my friends?" Part 2 of my roommate's crazy girlfriend. She stared at me, unable to respond. Then I said, "Just because I'm gay doesn't mean that I'm into you. Trust me, I'm not the least bit interested in you." She started sobbing and spewing BS, so I kicked her out and told her that she's not welcome anymore for making me uncomfortable in my own apartment. Her and my roommate both left, and he was super pissed at me. He didn't come back for a while, but I got some angry texts. However, I stood my ground about her not being welcome anymore. I told him he was free to stay or move out as he pleases. Most of her friends were on my side. Nearly a week later, my roommate returned home and he was giving me the silent treatment. I figured I'd just leave him alone and let him get over it. Then his girlfriend started calling me and demanding that I give the phone to him because he apparently wasn't speaking to her. I told her to kick rocks and that I wasn't getting in their business anymore. Soon after, my roommate finally started talking to me again. Turns out they got into a huge blowout fight and his girlfriend admitted that she wanted me to flirt with her just to prove that she could pull a lesbian. He told her that was messed up and then broke up with her on the spot. She wouldn't stop blowing up our phones for weeks until I finally blocked her number. It's been a few months and my roommate moved out. We're definitely not as close, but we're still good friends. His ex-girlfriend recently came out as bisexual on social media. How ironic.
Story time on why my dad would never allow me and my sister inside of his basement. So growing up, my parents split and my sister and I would stay with my mom. During the summer, we'd go see our father. My dad was a mortician and he owned a funeral home. When he would do his work, he'd go to his basement and tell us to never go inside of it. At night, he liked his basement. I always assumed that he didn't want us going down there in fear of us seeing dead bodies. One night, me and my sister was up. We couldn't sleep, so we started playing Truth or Dare. And my little sister dared me to go inside the basement. I didn't want to be a punk, so I did the dare, and I found the key to go to the basement. Before I get down there, I of course expected to see bodies, but when I was walking around, I didn't see any. But what was crazy was that it sounded like there were little girls crying. If you want to know what I saw, come back for part 2. This is part 2 of why my dad would never allow me and my sister inside of his basement. So, like I said, I went downstairs to the basement and I didn't see any bodies. Instead, I heard whimpering and crying. So, I went back upstairs and told my sister that there was nothing down there. She said that she wanted to see, so she came to the basement with me. When we were both walking around, she said that she heard the whimpering too. My sister had saw a door and it sounded like the noise was coming from behind the door. When we opened it, we saw girls chained up.
Story time about how I found out my dad was hooking up with other men on Craigslist. To provide a little bit of backstory, when my sister was 16, she came out as bisexual. My dad, being homophobic and conservative, kicked her out. So this set a tone for when I was born. I was raised to be anything but gay. If something looked, smelled, or seemed straight, he forced it on me. ATVs, monster trucks, whatever. My mom, on the other hand, was a lot more kind-hearted. She let me use her makeup and nail products, and essentially anything that I was interested in, such as gaming and fashion. Because of arguments and my dad cheating, my parents decided to get a divorce. But they did have joint custody. When I would go to my dad's, it seemed like his homophobia was getting worse. He would blast adult entertainment on the TV and bring home girls from his little biker gang. One day I accidentally left the AC on and it flooded the apartment. This led to a massive argument between my dad and I. We started arguing about everything, including the girls that he was bringing home. I stated that I didn't like girls in that way, and that's when everything clicked for him about my sexuality. Then he kicked me out. I was homeless until my mom was able to come get me. Years later, I got a voice message from my sister saying dad's gay. Stay tuned for part 2 and follow me on Insta. Story time about how I found out my dad was hooking up with other men on Craigslist. I absolutely did not believe my sister whenever she said that dad was gay. I was like, absolutely, there's no way. What's the proof? And I guess my dad had given his grandson, my nephew, his old laptop. On this laptop, he still had his ads up that basically said, come leave money on the seat for services. And it had a picture of his white truck. I was still in denial for the longest time because of how homophobic my dad was. But we decided to watch the Craigslist account for a bit. And during a time that we knew that he was dropping off our grandma in Florida, he posted on Craigslist using that exact rental car that he was using. Even though I was pretty much convinced at this point, it was later verified by a family friend who had seen him at a brothel that this was in fact true. He also was a locksmith for a living and used this job title in the email associated with the account. So for that upcoming Christmas, we compiled all the evidence together, put it all into a stocking, and set it out out for family Christmas. Follow the guy who sent me this story, and if you have a story that you'd like to share, DM me and follow me on